This podcast is intended for entertainment purposes, and while we strive for a respectful and inclusive environment, we acknowledge that certain topics discussed may be sensitive or offensive to some listeners. The views expressed by hosts and guests are their own and do not necessarily represent those of the podcast or its sponsors. Please exercise discretion, skip or pause any distressing parts, and we appreciate your understanding and open-mindedness as we encourage conversations rather than cancellations. Take that woke elsewhere. Thank you. KEVCAST. What's going on, everybody? Thank you for tuning in once again to the Lost in Talks podcast, the most lit podcast. And this is episode 113. And at this point, if you were just listening and not watching, or if there isn't even any video this week, you might be asking yourself, why is he doing the intro? Well, it's a very simple answer. Today we're doing a solo dolo. Once we came back from this little break that we had, we said that one of the format changes, amongst other things, kind of just philosophy changes, was that no matter what, if one person isn't available that week or multiple people aren't available that week, if somebody is available that week at some point to shoot and record a piece of content that would constitute the podcast for that week, then so it shall be done. Unfortunately this week, Jamal's been dealing with some headaches, past couple, this is something that's gone on for a very long time now, but it kind of came back in the past few weeks, and he's been soldiering through the past couple podcasts actually, but this week it just became a little bit too much to handle, so rightfully taking a week off, or the day off, and then, to get Ian to come down here, pick up the gear, it's a big ask for a West End man to do that in Scarborough these days. That's just how it goes, He's a tried and true West Ender now. So, time is just, as you get older, it just not only kind of are you able to ascribe value a lot more definitively to your time. There isn't as much free time. Maybe that is why it's called free time, right? Because you're not making money. It's not paid time. But then there's also just not as much of it because there's so many other commitments and responsibilities and things. So, especially during a weekday, a weeknight, it's a lot to ask for 4 or 5 hours to record an hour podcast when I could do it at my leisure, when I'm feeling good, when I'm ready to say, hey, let me record this shit. I could have done it on Monday, when we have our scheduled time, because that's time that I allot out during the week, that Monday evening to do our podcast. But I had some ideas, and that I was gonna bring to the group, and they don't work as a solo thing. So I figured I would talk for. There's a couple of ball things, and there's some new trades that even happened today and yesterday. So we'll talk about that a little bit. I wanted to wait for the draft once I didn't record the podcast Monday, because I wanted to particularly see what the Raptors and teams like the Blazers and Hornets would do. And we're not gonna, I'm not a big opinion guy, and I'm not gonna make this a whole podcast where I'm just like doing some sports rants, and because it's always nicer to have the conversation, with sports. But I'll kind of talk about that. And then there's just, we have our kind of a little loose format where the first half of the podcast is the current events, kind of what happened in the week, the catch up, and then the second half is something that a topic that's a little bit more substancy, a little bit more personal, a little bit more deep or philosophical, just something you've been pondering for the week, kind of thing. So I had that, and kind of just wanted to make sure that there was enough legs, or just enough to talk about. And I think I still don't know because it's also something where it's like I don't want to, uh, for lack of a better term, right now bust that nut until the cameras are rolling, until the mic is on, because that's something that I want to, even in a solo dolo pod, try and capture, which is that spontaneous, immediate feeling that we get, where it's like these aren't conversations that we've necessarily prepped, other than at the beginning of the podcast, Jamal writing out on a whiteboard some of the topics that we're going to cover, or kind of just the things that we can go from. So that's where I'm going to start. Like I said, let's start with ball. Lost in balls. So we had some the Washington Wizards were involved in some huge trades this week. First, you had Chris Paul traded for Bradley Beal, along with Landry Shamet coming along to Washington, and just a whole heap of picks. As well as Phoenix acquiring Jordan Goodwin and Isaiah Todd. So just again, once Smitty comes back on, even when Jamal comes back on, we'll talk a little bit more about this, of course. But Beal, Booker, KD is very interesting because Beal and Booker are very much the same type of player. Just kind of stat-wise and game-wise, they're like volume scorers who aren't necessarily three-point specialists. Beal's game got a little bit more point guardy, I would say. Last year, he was injured on and on for a lot of the season, but also coming back and having scoring options for the first time in his career was something where you saw his assists come up. So I expect that would probably be something to expect, especially with no Chris Paul and no real point guard on that team other than Campaign. I don't know if there was always kind of those little rumors and buzzes going around that they've been interested in Fred for a minute. So, I mean, I don't know how they would be able to, like, what does that team look like? Fred, Beal, Booker, Durant. I could envision us getting Ayton out of that. Do we trade Pirtle? You throw Pirtle in there. They have no bench. You're going to expect KD to be out for like half the season. Beal's going to get a good amount of rest. It's going to come down to them being able to have all three of them click, where they're not actively taking away from each other's game. Like Booker needs to average 27. KD needs to average, when you look at their playoff run for this year, for example, it was like, yeah, they're winning when KD and Booker drop 40. So is the formula now. But then there was also a point where they reached that wasn't even enough. So is the formula now that they need KD and Booker to drop 40 each, Beal to drop 30 or 40. If they have Ayton, he's dropping 20, and then that's 130, 40 points, whatever, and then that's like the key. I don't know, like that's just too. Are we playing 2K? Is I think the best way to describe it. But we'll see. Either way, I'm excited. I just like big moves like this, and there's been a lot of big moves already, and I'm excited to just see. You just like to see the switch ups, and Beal's been one of those guys where him and Dame are definitely similar, which is, why they were kind of being thrown around in the same type of rumors for sure. In terms of being these, elite scorers, the thing with Beal, is the original plan was supposed to be a 1A, 1B, or even a 1-2 type combo with Wall and Beal. So it wasn't even supposed to originally be Beal's team. And then he kind of just asserted himself to that all-star level that he nobody asked him to be at the all-star level, kind of thing. And basically, yeah, it's just, Washington obviously never put together a team that was worthy on paper. The last year's team, I guess, looked cool, but it's one of those things where it's like, even if Beal was healthy, I don't know, that's still a play-in team at best, if not like 7 or 8 maybe. I don't know. Because if you look at Chicago, you look at Atlanta, you look at Toronto, it's the same type of deal where it's like, yeah, there's definitely a lot of talented players on this team, but is that a winning team? Especially when you look at another trade like fucking Kristaps Porzingis going to Boston now. So look at this front court. Just compare front courts one for one. You got OJ Siakam and Pirtle, or you got Kuzma, Beal, and Porzingis versus Porzingis, Tatum, and Brown, Derek White, Brogdon. The trade was originally for Brogdon, which would have meant that they kept Smart, but Brogdon had, there were some injury things that caused that trade not to go through. So instead, there's a three-way now. Washington also gets involved even more, and Memphis takes Marcus Smart. Washington gets Tyus Jones, Mike Muscala, and Danilo Gallinari. I think Tyus Jones, it's one of those things where it's like, every time Ja was out, he was always filling in pretty nicely. So Washington definitely seems like one of those teams that, from a fantasy perspective, maybe we, if when Smitty, once we get into fantasy season again and Smitty's back on the pod, we'll talk a little bit more from a fantasy perspective, because I've been doing fantasy for 20 years. There's always going to be that tinge to the analysis that I bring just innately when I see these trades, because I'm thinking about, the internal ranking system in my head is now shifting around. I'm thinking, where am I taking Tyus Jones? Where am I taking Jordan Poole now? Which was another trade that Washington's involved in, trading Chris Paul to Golden State for Jordan Poole, a couple of picks, and Ryan Rollins. Poole and Tyus is very interesting from a fantasy perspective. From a obviously this is a rebuilding year for them. I think they probably get let go of Kuzma too, because he was asking for $30 million. I don't know where he goes. Boston is very interesting. What do they do with Time Lord? What do they do with Grant Williams? What do they do with Al Horford? We'll see. Either way, there's a lot of... I like these shakeups. Yeah, I think Poole needed to go. And I think Chris Paul on Golden State makes a lot of sense, just in terms of that team, the way that they... Chris Paul is one of those players that casuals... If a casual knows you, then there's a lot of media circus that comes around, like the story of his daughter getting bullied. It's something that follows Chris Paul, and Golden State's a team that can, if you compare that team to, let's say, a Memphis or even like a New Orleans right now, where it seems like they're not so hot on Zion anymore just because they don't like all this attention, and that's rightfully so, because it's not the greatest attention, let's say. But Memphis as well, where it's like the media part gets involved on court in some way. And yeah, you can talk about the Draymond and Poole incident, but you can also talk about they've been under the microscope, whatever the expression is, more than any other team, with the exception of maybe just LeBron as a person and whatever team that he's been on. And KD is up there, and he was on that team as well. And at the end of the day, the rings speak for themselves. The fucking Clay meme. Yeah. And the other thing too, about the draft, of course, Wemby, number one. I have this. So I just saw this tweet of, I think it's like this Charlotte bar. The reaction. Brandon Miller, and the way that Adam Silver said Brandon Miller is like the perfect name to have that type of letdown of a response. They're upset because they didn't draft Scoot. There was a lot of back and forth this week in terms of the odds and all that bullshit. In terms of Charlotte's been high on Brandon Miller since the lottery, since before the lottery, since just kind of scouting things out, and it seemed like that was their guy. But then they kind of have been topsy turvying, and you've been hearing things about them being interested in Scoot as well. My opinion, just looking at it, would be Scoot seems to be on that level of generational hype for a pick. Obviously not as big as Wemby, but if it was any other year without Wemby in this draft, Scoot would be one of those like big number one pick names, like an Anthony Edwards type, I think. So for that value alone, I don't know. Yeah, obviously, yeah, sure. You don't want to have two superstar prospect guards in LaMelo and Scoot, but is Dame, Scoot, Simons, Sharp, Grant any better? I don't think so. So I don't know if Portland is still thinking about making moves, but they're making me very mad right now because I don't want to see. At this point, I don't get me wrong. Dame is one of my favorite players, not anymore, but just in terms of his game and his bag and all that, like he's been one of my favorite players. But him just kind of staying around, there's only so many players who get to that superstar level where they can dictate what teams they want. If not, at least if they're not the ones being able to, force the teams to say, this is what I want and this is who I want to come with me, or this is who I want on that team that I'm going to, you can at least put out that list of here are the teams that I want to be on. And it has to be this list of teams. He's had that privilege. And yeah, shout out to the men who are loyal and not ring chasing, whatever. I'm not saying that the man needed to join the Lakers or the Warriors, but the Heat looked pretty cool. I don't know. I think there could have been a thing there. Fucking bro, just come to the Raptors. Give us that third pick, or give us Simons. You don't want to trade Sharp. Like that's I don't know. I don't know what they're doing, and the Raptors as well. I don't know what they're doing. Siakam doesn't want to go anywhere unless and then re-sign because he wants to stay with the Raptors. Like why are these men's being so loyal all of a sudden? Like, why do people not want to win? Like, why are we running back the last place in a play-in tournament team? Why are we running that back? And then the team that made the finals is getting better, and the team that made the conference finals is getting much better. Again, I think it's going to be. So I was not a Raptors fan from like 2012 to 2018, our We the North run. And this is very ironic with me wearing this Raptors sweater, but I think all of these Bay Stripes brand, whatever it's called, Raptors gear is like 70% off at the Bay now. So I bought a whole bunch of that shit. So now like 30% of my my wardrobe is Raptors gear. But I might not be a Raptors fan this season if we don't make any moves, because it's just like, why do you want to cheer for a team that's striving for ninth? Because we think we can make the same Cinderella run as the fucking Miami Heat because we got that dog like Jimmy? I don't think so, man. I do not think so. That's the end of the ball talk. One thing I did want to mention that I forgot was I am sipping on this Hop City High Top Hopper Creamsicle Ale. My dad's a big fan of the Hop City Barking Squirrel, so I seen this white can. I'm like, what is that? Oh, creamsicle. That's interesting. Yeah, bro, this shit. You see how it's got that little pinkish, that little peachish pinkish hue to it, that little cream soda hue to it. It just tastes like cream soda. Like it's nuts. Dare I say, a little, your palate changes when you get older. Cream soda now it's basically like, there are things now like milk chocolate, white chocolate, cream soda that are just like pure sugar to me. And it was always one of those things, when you're a kid, you're like, how the fuck could something be too sweet? That doesn't compute. That doesn't make sense. You get to that age where, like, I'm a dark chocolate guy now. I think this is a better use of the cream soda flavor because it's not as sugary, you know? Just great aroma. Yeah, man. Great aftertaste. Shout out Hop City, bitch. Are they? They're from. They must be from Ontario, Quebec. No, Quebec refund. Aren't these beers usually like very upfront about where the fuck they're from, bro? New Brunnies, the Saint John New Brunswicks. Okay. In other current news, I didn't want to talk about this. The submarine Titanic thing. What I will say is rest in peace to those who were aboard the submarine. I will also say rest in peace to the 750 refugees on the boat that capsized in the Mediterranean, 100 children. A story that I only found out about, and probably a lot of people either did find out about or didn't find out about because of the news attention this week of the submarine story. You know, it's one of those things where it dominates Twitter, it dominates the news cycle, and then you'll have that thing where it's like, hey, yeah, since we're so fascinated about these crashes or these underwater things and all of this, here's this other story of this one of the most tragic by number and obviously just by its refugees from Pakistan and Egypt and Syria who are just trying to, escape political, social turmoil. And just, yeah, the boat's gone. It's one of those things where, the submarine, the story, the memes, obviously I caught a few of them. These types of stories just in general just put me off even before I hear anything. Like when something just becomes something that needs that context, and then we find like just these terms that come about and all these things. I just don't want to know more. I don't want to be one of those people who knows everything about it. And I get it's kind of that thing where it's like water cooler talk, where if you're driving to work and you hear it on the radio, or that's the thing that's going to be talked about amongst friends at work, just because it's so dominating on Twitter, it just becomes one of those things, just like something to talk about for an extended period of conversation beyond small talk, beyond the weather. For instance, the weather became that level of beyond small talk, weeks ago when the smog and the forest fire air was a topic, right? So it's in that vein of just things to talk about, things to meme about. I'm not like the memes. I saw memes that were funny. The whole thing about them being billionaires and stuff obviously makes me, I don't know. Like I feel bad saying it, even though people are like through the memes, people are so very openly like, it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where, is this a cautionary tale where it's like, should we not be spending our money on these? Should people who have this much money not be spending their money on these types of things? Yes. At the same time, can I empathize with the fact that there was like a 19-year-old boy on there who didn't want to be on there, but he went on because his dad was really, passionate about it, and they both ended up, dying together. Can I be empathetic about that? Of course. Can I be very sad for that? Of course. Can I be sad for these lives gone? Yes. But can I also be kind of empathetic to the people who are like seeing the joy or seeing the silver lining in this and using it as a kind of meme slash bonding slash kind of weekly distraction from the abysmal darkness of being in existence and humanity type thing? Yes, I can see that for what it is. But also at the same time, it's like, yeah, there was a story of another uh, incident on water where infinitely more people died, to the point where it was like, you know in your heart of hearts that there are way more of these types of stories of immigrants going missing, dying on board, in transit, voluntarily, involuntarily, that you don't know about. There's always going to be more that you don't know about than you do know about. Even if you follow the news every day, there's going to be more that you don't know about than you do know about. But this incident was it the second most people who died? I don't know what the qualifications were, but that's the gravity of that. And that's not something that obviously everybody wants to think about or talk about, because that's not memeable, and that's not that doesn't lead to, I guess, a bigger conversation about, I don't know, what is the bigger conversation about? Like, I would say that, well, it was like 250K for that trip to go see to see the Titanic. I would argue that that's probably one of the least, that's like in the bottom tier of stupid things that fucking rich people spend their money on. So I wouldn't get too come uppy about it, like dying in a fucking trafficking thing where they plan some fucking Epstein type thing. Yeah, maybe then, but that's like on the shitty side. That's not on the stupid side. I don't know. The fascination with Titanic in general is just, and people like James Cameron getting press, and him saying, and me now knowing shit like he's been on the Titanic or has been around in the Titanic more than the fucking captain of the Titanic has. Like, that's fucking stupid to me. That's the kind of shit that I don't want to hear, Anyways.
It's an evil world we live in.
Lost in Talks podcast.
Yes, sir. Welcome back to the Lost in Talks podcast, episode 113, a little solo dolo edition. I'm Kevin. But who am I? That's as simple as it gets in terms of what I want to be getting into for this second half deep topic, whatever you want to call it, part of the podcast. Before that, we'll just take a little step back. I wanted to do a little shout out. We got a real nice comment on Twitter from the user Ricardo Diaz's. Been watching y'all for about a year now. You guys are cool and talk about topics people want to hear opinions on. Keep the videos coming, because people do watch. Kevin be chill as fuck, man. And we got two of the devil horn emojis. Shout out Ricardo, man. This is one of those things that makes my heart warm, not just for the actual comment itself, which is thoughtful and clearly shows a level of understanding of us and the podcast and what we try to accomplish. But also, this is why I don't like talking as much as most people, because you can say so much in three sentences on a YouTube comment. You don't need to be ranting all the time. I don't need to hear more, because I get it. Like, Been watching y'all for about a year now. You guys are cool and talk about topics people want to hear opinions on. We frequently talk about things that are interesting to us and then also frequently either acknowledge or are clearly thinking about the fact that we cover things and talk about things and go about things in a way that isn't traditional to the current streams and the methods and the formulas that are available for making money, for turning it into a cash cow. Keep the videos coming because people do watch. This is another thing where it's like, clearly this is somebody who is a insightful listener, because I don't go back and watch the podcast, but I do know that at least once every 2 podcasts, I would say, we make some sort of comment that's directed to, probably every podcast, we make some sort of comment that's directed towards us making, it's a combination of it being a joke and as well as it being kind of the sad, brutal truth at the same time. We make a joke about us being kind of unknown, us being kind of just basically at the same level, publicity wise, money wise, resource wise, as when we started more than 10 years ago now. You know, when we started making music in this same basement, this same summer, 12 years ago, when we finished high school. And you know, again, it's a joke, and it's something that we also do say kind of as a serious observation. We're not just blindly out here all that. At the same time, I can announce to you that I am the greatest artist that I know. I am my favorite artist, and I'm also the most unknown artist that I know. And I'm also my biggest critic. So to sum up all of that, it's just those 3 sentences touch on so many things personally and professionally that we address through the podcast. It's something that we are so grateful to the podcast to be able to air these things out in a way that allows to reach people who are clearly picking up on it and commenting on it. And you don't just say that just as like a keep your head up, keep your chin up kind of thing. It's clearly we're establishing a sympathy, an empathy, you know, like a connection here in terms of like, I'm not saying that Mans is going through the exact same thing, or like Mans feels that same kind of, what's the word, like shame or you know, just kind of self-deprecation kind of thing of like not being where you hope to be or want to be career-wise. But clearly there's just an acknowledgement of that, which that in itself is, you know, in the world today of like virtue signaling and the capitalization of goodwill, you know, like being able to profit off of just telling people, hey, manifest and write down your gratitudes and be mindful, you know, to be able to turn that into a business. It's great that it's more available and more accessible than it's ever been. I guess technically, if they didn't pull us out of our countries, then we would have. They tell us go back, and then they also don't realize that there is no back to go to. But if I were to just say, for example, to stay in India, then I would have had access to all of these. There would have been no identity questions here. There would have been no identity crises. I would have had my job. It would have been given to me from when I was a fucking 4-year-old. Maybe I wasn't running around with it. I was actually allowed to be a kid, then to be a young adult, then to be an adult. But it's like there's no guesswork at any of those stages, right? But at the same time, nowadays, yes, it's good to be able to have those buffers and filters handy. But I think something that we like to talk about on the Lost in Talks podcast is not to be fence sitters, so, for lack of a better word, but to kind of just to yeah, to the same way that we are able to both be overconfident and to hype up our work more than anybody else would be able to, as well as criticize our work more than anybody would be able to, and make fun of our successes and our failures and all that stuff. We like to do that with everything. Everything has its good and its purpose and its utility, and everything has its wastefulness and its evil impacts and so on and so forth. Money. People. Money is the root of all evil. Money isn't inherently evil. Money is a concept, right? Money is just paper. Money is Bitcoin. Money is just data, whatever. Another thing that this is related to, I saw this in the news this week. The creator of Black Mirror had a quote saying something along the lines of, we didn't want to be known as the tech is bad show. We didn't want to be this like sci-fi show where it's like if you're pitching it to somebody, it's like, oh yeah, every episode is just a different instance of tech fucking up humanity. The point of the show is that tech and innovations and stuff happens and we're fucked. And that's why the fucked up shit happens, is because we find the way to use that thing in the most fucked up way possible, to flip it on its head. And that's just the natural statistics of the world. That's just, it's just one of those things where it's like you have something and it's going to be used maybe for its most utilitarian goodwill end, and then it's also going to be used for its most evil purposes. That's not what I wanted to talk about, but what I did want to talk about is related to the comments, is related to this question of identity and certainty and stuff. It's talking about the distinction. Where do we draw the line between me and you? I think it would be easier to first only think about this just from my perspective. Just listen to me. You are now me. You're now Kevin A. Ramroop. When right now I'm actually, you know what? No, you're still you. Okay? You're still you. You're this person that is listening to the podcast, and I am me. I am hosting the podcast. But I am hosting this podcast alone. Usually when we do this podcast, I'm conversing with Jamal and Ian and Smitty and guests. I'm not me. And there's we, the hosts, and then there's you, the audience, the imagined audience, the audience that I might be able to directly think about. Okay, for sure this person's listening. Yeah, Ricardo is probably gonna listen and watch. Shout out to you. But then there is the yous. There's Jamal and Ian are the you in that situation as well. And then outside of, now let's go a little bit more meta. Let's take it outside of the framework of the podcast. For example, if the webcam wasn't on right now and the microphone wasn't on right now, and I was having the same speech, let's say I was doing this exact same conversation in preparation. I wanted to do a dry run of this conversation before I recorded it. So I was doing the same thing. Maybe instead of sitting down here, I was wandering back and forth in my basement, which is just something that I do like a hamster on a wheel. I've been doing it ever since I've lived here. So who is the you that I'm then talking to in that situation? Is it different, or is it the same? Am I still projecting the same, imagining that the camera is on and imagining that the mic is recording? Because at the same time, because if that's true, I know after years of doing this that there is always a fundamental difference for some reason between a red light being on and a red light being off. There are so many times where I have just been pitching an idea. What if we said this, a grant application or something, or working out a topic like this, and it comes across so much more eloquently when I'm doing a take for a song and I do it perfectly, but it also might just be that, for that it might just be because, you sound better in your head than you do on the mic. But it's not the quality of this, it's the actual execution of the idea. Like if I were to do a dry run of this same topic that I've had, and it's not that I've done a dry run, but I've been working out this idea, like what I want to talk about within this idea in my head, without going through it, without spoiling it for myself too much, essentially, without putting these specific pieces and these specific words together. But if I did, and also in my head, it just sounds so much more coherent. Like I did try to record this in one take. I didn't want to. I didn't want to do the break with the two parts if I didn't have to, because I think it would just be easier to have one video file and one audio file. But my head got hot. I think I fried my brain, overloaded the RAM, literally, and so I was starting out talking about this, and it was coming out like I was just and doing and like, so I was just let me just stop, let me smoke a J. That was actually last night. I don't know if you would, if you're a keen watcher and you can notice that in the first half there wasn't the reflection of the sun. Now there is. I actually just like let me just sleep on it. Anyways, if the mic wasn't on and the camera wasn't on, I might have had the same conversation much more eloquently, because I'm not. And it might be the physical things that play the mental aspect of it, like the fact that as I'm talking, I'm seeing the green bar level of the recording, monitoring my audio. I'm seeing the red recording on Logic, seeing all the waveform come together in real time. I'm looking at my fucking face as I'm recording it. I'm like, do man see the raccoon smoke eyes? Yes, especially now that I pointed it out. That all plays a difference in the way that it comes out. And there's also a difference between, if I don't want to keep thinking about this, or if I just want to stop abruptly when there's no camera on or there's no mic on, I could just stop myself mid sentence without even having to say anything. You know what I mean? Like The Sopranos. But when you're on, like, I'm not gonna make extra work and make it look stupid. So I got to keep going. And even if even when it's harder when you're alone, but at least when you're conversing with people, you can lay out, because I can feel myself getting to that point, like where I got to last night when I was overheating, where I'm like, okay, I made my point. I'm just like blabbering. Let me just lay out and let somebody else continue. But when you're alone, you have to kind of keep going by yourself. But when you're alone, conceptually, when I'm working out ideas, when I'm talking through a dry run of a podcast idea, or doing a vocal take, just coming up with a grant idea, just talking out loud. Who am I talking to? Is it just me talking to me? But who is, I think there's a separation between, again, Now let's go to the point where now the you that I'm talking to is not the you, an intended audience of the podcast, or you. You is now the yous that are the projection in my head. Now let's try to break down that microphone webcam barrier where we're not recording a podcast right now. This is me doing that dry run. I'm wandering back and forth across my basement. Now I'm not talking to anybody except me. But who am I talking to when I'm talking to me? Because within that there's distinctions, right? When I'm talking to me, I'm talking to the me that is dealing with the day-to-day of life. There's the me that has to worry about the dishes and the money and everything. Everything that people have responsibilities for. There's the me that I want to be. There's the me that has the money already. There's the me that has the resources and the clout to be able to do things. There's the me that is yelling at me right now to get my money up so that I can start doing the things that I want to do. There's the me that is like a Buddhist about this whole situation. It's kind of just like, hey man, this is all an illusion anyway. Who the fuck are you talking to right now? What, you think you're talking to you or me or this, and you're trying to distinguish between this and that. Nothing exists, right? There's that timeline. There's that iteration of me following along the bag chaser, following along who it is that I am right now. And okay, yes, you guys are my counsel, you bag chaser, you Buddhist, you these are alternate versions of me who are also taking influence from people that I know. You when you have people, it's a very common thing when somebody would be like, oh, I couldn't go to the club tonight, or my mom. I could hear my mom cussing me out, or I hear my boss cussing me out for drinking that night or whatever. You have these projections of people that are close to you that have had an impact on your upbringing or your growth, or they're in your space, they're in your space of influence. So that you project them and their values and their thoughts and things into your inner monologue, into this moment right now where it's me, Kevin, talking to me, the inner projections of Kevin, right? You might also sometimes think of them as like the devil or the angel on your shoulder. They come in many different forms, right? And you can kind of distinguish them into many different categories and give them different faces and different influences and things. But is that still me? Especially when we're talking about, let's say, I'm thinking about a decision, a life decision, and this is true, right? Over the past, my entire life, but especially over, I would say, the past like year or so, especially since Nui's been done, because Nui Blanche was something that we were supposed to finish in 2020, and coming off of that, I was supposed to release my quote unquote debut album, which has been on hold since 2019, because it was supposed to be the follow-up to Tropic, which came out in 2019, which was supposed to come out in 2018, and there was an album that was supposed to come out before that. So I've been at the same time thinking about those other streams, the bag chasers, the Buddhist aspect of it all, I've actually been thinking about them in terms of an idea rather than in terms of just like framing it from a completely personal perspective. And that's, I think, one of the main reasons I was so drawn to being an artist, to being a musician, was because I was able to merge those things, these things that you can't, this thing that I'm trying to work out and talk about right now is something that, yeah, I guess I could probably pay a therapist to talk about, or I could have a bunch of close friends to talk about these things to, and that works. But for me, there are things that kind of go beyond conversation. There's things that, like, as much as there's so many things that I'm going to try to want to express in this podcast, in the podcasting in general, in conversations with people in general, but there's also, I just know deep in my heart at this point, and it's never going to go away, that like there's only so much that words can say. And I mean, every language, every mode of expression is limited to the vocabulary and the tools that it has, right? And English is bloated. English has way too many words, twice as many words as the next language. But even within that, there isn't enough. And there's so much that we can do to push, because English now more than ever has meant so many different things, but still there's never enough. For me, with music, it's yeah, obviously you're speaking in English, but there's songs that I've put out that I recorded gibberish takes for, and I'm like, you know what? There is no English that I could put that's better than this, what I've said. So I'm just gonna put it out in gibberish, because it's the feeling that the music captures. And not only that, the feeling that it captures, but in the process of making that music, the personal growth has been the thing that I've focused on the most, in terms of where do I derive the satisfaction or the success aspect out of the music that I've made up to this point. It's come from what has that song meant for me in terms of what it's allowed me to let go personally, physically, mentally, as well as what has it allowed me to now take on. What is it? All of the best work I've done has been a combination of somebody asking me to do something and do it right away. So learning how to do things on time, that's something that I think we all learn in school. But then the other part of it is like holding myself accountable for, it's like, what do I want to learn? What do I want to be better at? And through that, I feel like my music can represent, just as there are so many different ways to define and distinguish what is me, what is you, the music also represents an aspect of me and my growth. And that, for me, has been the priority beyond looking at it from a monetary perspective, looking at it from a fulfillment perspective. It's been more about like a clout perspective. It's been more about what is the music offered me in my life. But at the same time, it hasn't. I think I can see this with other people who have this kind of overconfidence, where they don't have this diverse array of me's or you's talking projections in their head during their inner monologues, where when they're asking themselves about these kind of critical moments, like, for example, if a critical decision that I'm working on right now is what are the specifics of the album? Like, what do I want this album to be? And that's a big question, and that's also like a very small question in terms of like the song. I guess the songs are a big thing, but like the track order, the release date, and the Instagram execution, and all of those. There's the small finer details, and then it's like conceptually what I want this album to be. And I've been thinking about this again, because I've had a debut album be delayed for so long now. I've basically been working on album ideas, and it's been just kind of, going back to that idea of these little ideas that are on the burner, and then they kind of come together. During the pandemic, I was thinking about what it would be like to be an artist that never releases an album, right? Like, what if that's my thing? Because everything else that I've done to that point has been so not unconventional, not against the grain, but just like not what any other artist path generally follows in terms of getting this, then getting this. And you can kind of track that progress in terms of whatever the milestones may be. We can now pretty much track it in terms of, oh, they got 5,000 Spotify plays, then they got 10, then they got 50, then they got 100, then they got a million, right? In some ways it has worked that way for me. Like the streams were going up to an extent, but then after Tropic, it was kind of like, the pandemic hits and it's like, where do we go? And so we went through whatever was asked of me. And at the time, what was asked of me was, well, first it's like, just kind of, we're talking about ideas that are like simmering. I've always had this idea of like, what if you dropped a tape that, at my level as an artist, and there's a whole podcast on this. Go back to the 2020 July episode. I don't remember what Kevin dropped the tape episode or what. I don't remember what the name of it is, but talk more about this of just like, yeah, what if you dropped the tape at my level, not a level of a Drake or a Kanye or Beyonce where you drop an album without any promotion, and that's a genius marketing strategy. What if an artist at my level did that? And the timing just kind of worked out in terms of I didn't want it to be a social experiment or anything. I wanted it to be an album that actually did do better numbers, if not at least the same numbers as Tropic, even if I knew that it wasn't as commercially viable or as of a sound as Tropic was as a listen. It's still what I feel is just a better story and better songs, just a tighter story. And actually, I would have no problem calling that my debut album either, if not for the fact that it was just like that nobody listened to it. And then 2021, adapting that same creative energy of like wanting to do the Nui project, wanting to do an album into this artist residency project that we also had to adapt from being like a traditional in-person residency at UTSC, where we'd be working with the students at the arts, culture, and media department, having guest lectures, and then also doing like workshops out of the Doris McCarthy Gallery, where we would be presumably working on our Nuit Blanche project while using that as like a teaching tool for the students and just like an engaging tool. So then I had to, again, just use that creative energy, create another project that's kind of like a preamble or companion piece to the what the Nuit Blanche project ended up being. Then Nuit Blanche comes out. Now you have this. I have this backlog of albums that came out but didn't come out, and then this backlog of all of these songs that have never come out in the process of all of these ideas and changes throughout time. And all of it comes down to this question of me not narrowing in what it is that me is. And that's because I think part of that is there's this battle that starts on this like cellular level of me not being able to distinguish the difference between me and you. Not being able to, I guess, let those voices go, to fully invite them back in and be like, okay, no, I need your counsel because I need the bag right now, for example. So I need that voice to come back stronger than ever. I need to start looking at the game like a game. I need to start looking at it like, Logan Roy or Tony Soprano or something like that. You know what I mean? Like that type of Don Draper, that type of capitalist mindset, right? Just trying to think if there's anything else that I want to cover in that regard. Right. So yeah, in terms of the album that I'm working on right now, like where we are with the idea right now is I have a set of songs picked out. I'm also uploading the entire backlog of songs that I that haven't come out, and kind of just going through that step by step whenever I have the like urge to do it. I don't want to do it just and start making it feel like work, because it's such a weird thing where it's just like all I'm doing is throwing on this Isotope plugin that I got, which is just like a kind of AI mastering plugin. Everybody's making them now, but Isotope is Isotope is reliable for the mastering shit. And literally, you just throw it on, analyze track, bleep bloop bleep bloop, and it just makes it sound just louder and bigger and a little bit fuller. So I've been tossing every song that I've ever bounced and listened to, and just personally on some level at some point I either enjoyed it or somebody has kind of given me enough of a reason to be like, you know what, somebody would listen to this if I put it out, basically. So it's not something that maybe I would listen to, but somebody would listen to. And then there's the songs that I don't know if anybody else would listen to, but I know that I would listen to them, so I put them out. So that's what all of these songs are, right? It's all of these bounces that just happen to happen. And it's a very iterative process, right? Like, this also starts from releasing 30 songs for my 30th birthday earlier this year, and that being a very spontaneous idea. But then, yeah, just kind of iterating on that, and so it's like, okay, 30 songs, then let's turn that into all of my songs, because that was still the idea that I had in the back of my head too, because I first was just like, if I can name 30 songs off the top of my head without having to go dig into my computer, and they haven't come out yet, I'll do it. I'll upload all of them. And I got to like 37, but I knew there was more. And then this album idea has always just kind of come back around. And the way that I'm thinking about it now is like, my debut album would be my greatest hits album, and my debut album might also be my retirement album. It's not like something that I'm committing to. It's just something that I'm throwing out there, because once again, we're coming back to this idea of, I have all of these different me's. I have all of these different yous that they exist. And you get to a point, when you're a kid, when you're younger, they're not as fully formed, and they don't need as much attention unto themselves. And then also the things in your life too. It's not even just the projections in your head, but it's also the things in your life, your job, your family, your friends, all of these things, right? And then when you get older, you start having to, you don't have as much time. I talked about this at the beginning of the podcast, and being respectful of everybody's kind of time and management and of that time, and how valuable is the time to do this podcast versus me being able to do it by myself, for example. Yeah, you just get to a point where it's like, at any given point, I don't want to be the person who's like missing something completely. I think that's the biggest thing, right? So I get to a point where I'm like, in the past, since Nui's been done, where it's like, is there a point where we gotta call this? Like, I know. So while I'm thinking about that, it's like, is that the rational thing to do? I'm also trying to think of like, what else? Okay, so what else would I do? Because, I mean, let's face it, I could do anything. I could do anything. I could reasonably do anything. And it's funny, like as I'm thinking about that, as I'm thinking about should I make a big personal life change, a big career change, it's like it's unavoidable at this point that that also just turns into an idea where I'm start thinking about like, hey, is this a TV series where I'm when I dropped out of Schulich when I was 18, one of the main reasons being is like I want to pursue I'm a rapper. I want to be a rapper. But mainly, just that business wasn't for me. But which is ironic, but um well, not ironic, but it's telling actually that that's why this has been such a challenge for me to try and find like a way to naturally. At this point, I'm just more upset. I'm not upset about all of the clout that's all the whatever the millions and millions and world tours and all that bullshit. I don't care about that. I just care about the fact that I've just not gotten paid for the labor hours that I put in to this shit. That's it. If I could get paid, that's like whatever. If you paid minimum wage over the last 10 years, I've put in full-time hours work. So that's all I'm upset about is just not getting compensated fairly for that. And if there was at least that in place, I don't know. Is that the whole point? Is like if people were just comfortable getting paid minimum wage to do creative work, then it would. Well, it's not like it's helping now, like the system that's in place. It's still people get paid millions to just create mid, right? So whatever. The point I was trying to say was the personal ideas of like, should I stop also became the ideas that I started brewing for like what's next, what's after. Once I put out this album, once I put out all my songs, I'm also thinking about what's the next idea. Where do I build off of this, or where do I, let's say I retire and change my name and become just a different artist. This is kind of where I'm in headspace wise, right? And one of the ideas that I had is like, and I've been having this idea for a while now is thinking about just like projects and work beyond like this is the next album, and it can be just an album, sure, but like what if there was a concept to work around before the songs came about, and it doesn't need to be like, okay, I outlined this whole idea, now I can start filling in the songs accordingly. It can be like that. I've never worked like that. I would be interested to see how that works. But it can also be something where it's just like the way that I've kind of been working in the past now, where I have these general structures of narrative for the Nuit Blanche project and for the Doris McCarthy residency project, where I have these narrative point arcs that I want to touch on and these themes, and then putting it together with the songs that I've already made. Because again, like that's the way that I've structured this thing, where if it's happening to me and I'm translating it that moment, that feeling into a song, then it's going to also connect to the the story, world building type things that I want to get into, because the world building that I want to do is directly influenced by the experiences that I've had as a person, right? And I guess the world building that I want to have in my work is a reflection of the world that I want to see in reality, or the world that I want to be able to engage with, which is something I think we also need to think about a lot as we move forward in this AI and AR and VR world and stuff. But and also that consideration of the Black Mirror creator saying, don't want to be the tech is bad show. You don't want to be a Luddite and get the was it Ted Chiang who had that article on Luddite? Yeah, there's a New Yorker article written by Ted Chiang about AI. This is just a side note, but AI, and he talks about the misconception of Luddites being people who are like just completely resistant to new technology, and it's more just like the fear that there's a inevitability that people are just going to find out how to use this new technology to just create more, just to worsen the wage gap, to the divide, the class divide, because that's all technology has really done. This was not, and it's not the technology's fault itself. It's our exploitation of it. Anyways, moving into this next phase, I like it's just the way that it goes, where personally and professionally, the things that I think about and the things that I want to be as a person align, right? So I was like, what if there was this kind of the next concept of the next project would be revolved around these kind of alternate lives that I propose for myself. And again, this is like kind of this stitching together of multiple ideas I've had from multiple times. So a few of the different buckets of kind of narrative and world building ideas that I've been working with for, let's say, the past year or so, but again, an extension of all these little things that have just stuck around and simmered, has been, so like labor songs, songs that are sung in, slave camps and prisons, sea shanties, on long voyages, even just like, I call them functional songs, kind of that general grouping of like religious songs, ceremonial songs. There's this whole, there's all of these folk recordings and still these traditions today of people who use music not as not for commercial purposes, which is what music has been for the last 100 years. But before that, the entirety of humanity before that, music was something that was a just a either, you're doing this like laborious task, you're on the ship, you're in the fields, and there's this rhythm that develops naturally because everybody's doing a similar task. And in order for, the rhythm actually, if everybody was on the same vibe, on the same pace, then it actually helps the work run more efficiently. But then also just mentally and emotionally, people are a little bit more liberated, right? So it operates kind of in that twofold aspect. So there is a little bit of a commercial aspect to it still in the labor songs, but for the most part, these songs exist because they're an extension of humanity, not because they're a commodity, right? Which what's the difference? But that's another conversation. Another thing that I was thinking about is, prison songs. The idea of these prisoners who represent these different archetypes. And then I later added the idea of like, what if these archetypes are these versions of me that I've been sort of thinking about, bringing everything that I've talked about back around full circle. So these versions of me that I've talked about, I've talked about a few of them, but these ones that that I've kind of laid out for creative purposes, because of the alliteration and just because of like the way that they kind of play off of one another, is a poet, a prophet, a pop star, and a pariah. So the poet is like the academic, snobby, skipped 2 grades and finished high school at 16 and had a PhD at 23 kind of thing. Like, these are instances of me that are heightened up to the max, but then they're also feasible within this specific timeline of who I am, you know? Because I was asked to if I wanted to skip a grade twice, in I think grade 3 and grade 5 maybe, and both times the decision came down to me, and I just didn't want to do it. It just didn't feel right. But I can imagine that if had I did it, then that is a decision that would fundamentally change who I am. I don't think I would be fucking in my basement, speaking to myself if I skipped 1 or 2 grades. I don't know. Maybe, but I don't know. But in this situation, becomes like this big snobby academic professor who also has this kind of like fiction series that turns into like a franchise or whatever, you know. Essentially, in every instance, these alternate lives are they find a way to exploit something that I am interested about still am interested in to this day, but they found a way to bring it to its full potential of like securing the bag from it. So like this poet would be kind of like that Jordan Peterson type of energy in terms of being very what do you call it? Not dictatorial. What's the word? Somebody who's like a very charismatic leader, you know, and is able to just with like rhetoric and a specific way of dissecting things and targeting certain audiences, they can kind of, you know, they can fire up in a good way and in a bad way a certain group of people. Also like a little bit of like Michael Crichton influence in terms of like being this polymath, you know, and being a writer, not a doctor, but a doc, yeah, PhD, like a doctor, a writer, movie writer, you know, just kind of that kind of personality. So the prophet, you know, the prophet, it's a play on words of like PROPHET, like Prophet Muhammad, but then also like prophet, PROFIT. So this is an alternate timeline of somebody who finished Schulich, and then just again I'm putting in the personal details, but these were categories that I had that were separate from me until I was like, hey, what if they are inspired by literal alternate versions of me that were in some way feasible? So this person actually finished Schulich, and I was trying to think of like what would it take for me in my life right now to have finished Schulich. And I guess other than, let's say, if I lived in downtown, or I want to say like Brampton or Mississauga or something, and I had a lot of family here, so there was a lot more influence than just that of like my parents. There was like a whole kind of community that I had to show face for. Then I think I would have been a lot more motivated to finish a prestigious program like Schulich. No disrespect. I'm just saying like that's the only reason that you fucking care about wanting to do something like that, right? Like otherwise, I don't know why it would be so hard for me to explain. It's just like, yo, I just didn't like business. How can you not like business? Well, first of all, I didn't take a business class in high school, so that there's a start there. It's not really something that's part of the curriculum if you don't take like a business class. And it's just not something. I was never a kid who was like doing the summer job circuit and things like that. You know, I was never looking to chase the bag as much as other people were, you know? And I'm not saying that's all it comes down to, but I think that has a lot to do with it. So this prophet, it's the play on words, where this person is like a Jay Shetty type beat, you know, where he's able to capitalize on spirituality and being like this personality who talks about self-help type of things. I have like these character sketches that I just started writing down. The pop star is kind of like, I would say very similar to Connor for Real from Popstar, right? Lonely Island, Andy Samberg. One of my favorite movies, where it's kind of like this, very inspired, obviously, by like Justin Bieber and these kind of pop figures, being kind of like virtuosic in their way, but also very so much of their brand is like their seeming naivete, childlikeness, that type of feeling. So like this streamline of, let's say this is a version of me who like popped off at 17 because I was doing YouTube covers or some shit, and then become this the pop choreograph world tour or whatever pop star. And then I actually expanded it. So it was like, what if it was triplets? So each of them took these different routes. So one was a pop star musician. One was one tries to be like this, pretends like they're like, a top actor of their generation, but they're just like the, they did like the young adult franchise, like Maze Runner, whatever. And then the other one is like a stand-up comedian who did like YouTube skits and the Nickelodeon skit shows, and then SNL, and then actually became a better actor than the actor who's wanted to be an actor their whole life. And they all started on a Nickelodeon show too, or some kid show. It just how naturally can these ideas fall in? And obviously now we're reaching out, if it's like we're talking about a version of me that's triplets that are pop stars, but that's okay to let the idea go away and not be this thing that's just a self-contained thought experiment. That's never what it was supposed to be. I don't think about that too often, and it wasn't something that I gave much thought into, like detail, like really thinking about it. What does that Schulich grad version of me look like? What does the grade skipping Kevin version of me look like? But the whole, to really wrap that whole thing around, it's just like the thought process that I take in terms of thinking about these alternate versions of me and the distinction between me and you and all of these things. It plays heavily into my choices that I make as a human, as a person, as Kevin Ramroop, as well as an artist, as Kevin A, as a host of this podcast, as a member of Wave Art Collective, all of these things. And that's also, again, what makes the distinctions hard, but it's also what makes the distinctions not just distinctions for distinction's sake. It's also, people make distinctions between I am this, therefore I am not that, and that can apply to something politically, religiously, racially, socially, whatever, right? Value-wise, moral-wise. But for me, it's one of these things where it's like, it's not that I believe in everything. It's just that I try not to ignore all of these different versions of me and you that I've interacted with throughout my entire life, because they all, no matter how ridiculous, I personally, and again, I don't know what I mean, but there's like that, that deep, the one, that version, the I think therefore I am version of you, where it's like, you don't got to put too much thought into it. The deep rooted version of me, there are people that I think about in my day-to-day life, or who are in my realm of influence to some extent, who I wouldn't, who I try to do the opposite of what they do. You know what I mean? I think we all have those people who are just as important as the people that you look up to. There are people that you not look down on, but you look away from. You know what I mean? Like you look at what they're doing and you want to go the absolute other direction. And I think that's important too. But at the same time, that's me making a distinction between me and you. But at the same time, like I said, and we could keep doing this forever, but how far or how thin is that line between me and you in every situation right now, when it's just a podcast between me and you, or if it's a podcast between me and Jamal and Ian and you, or if it's a podcast, or if it's just life. It's not a podcast. Yeah, I think that's all I'm gonna say, because I don't know if that got away from me, but I do know that that was an hour straight of talking, so I'm sure a lot of it got away from me. But I think we brought it back around enough, and yeah. There isn't. It's weird. There's no natural way to end this, because it's a topic of just, I'm gonna be thinking about this once I turn off the camera and the mic. It's like, oh yeah, no, this what I'm talking about is that it doesn't turn off. I'm still talking to me or you when the mic is off. So we just try to capture the best of what we can in the podcast, the best of our thoughts, but it ends up, sometimes we just end up getting lost too and coming back around. And I think those are the best moments. And I think that's what I'm doing. And now, to not risk going even more excessive, I'm gonna end it here. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been the Lost in Talks podcast, episode 113, Solo Dolo edition. Make sure to follow us all on the socials. Make sure to leave a comment. Yeah, who are you and who am I? What kind of distinctions do you make when you talk to yourself or when you talk to myself? What kind of alternate versions and alternate timelines do you think about in your life? Those people that you could have easily been with just a simple change of one decision, Because I think, I don't know. There's a lot of context now with the MCU and multiverse, everything everywhere. There's a lot of context for that now, and I think there's a lot of utility in just having that complexity of getting lost in that confusion of who you are. You throw yourself into a spin cycle. You feel that like nothing. Who is anybody? What is every? And then you start to finally come around to feeling a little bit more connected to things. So yeah. Thank you guys. Peace.